I'm the captain of Kitfox Games, and we've produced a lot of different games over the years, and a lot of them are using a procedural generation algorithm, and it's been helpful to me to start thinking about that algorithm as a co-collaborator, because even if you're a single person team and you're trying to make the most beautiful game of your soul, it's not actually like this when you start giving over some of the control to the dynamic systems. You're not actually sure what's going to come out, and so it's closer to a somewhat controlled environment where maybe you try to micromanage someone painting your stencils correctly. But even co-authored content is more careful, and honestly, trying to talk to an algorithm and tell it what you want is basically interspecies communication. You're trying to teach it not only how to understand what you're trying to do, but also get them to produce things that humans like. And so it's really explaining your intent to someone who thinks very, very differently. And our first game, Shattered Planet, used procedural generation primarily for level design. You might notice there are these little blocks, and we use cellular automata to grow the little rooms and connect them to each other. And it was, it was this fine level. But you can kind of read an article I read about how the standard flow ideas of level design were kind of difficult to explain. And we revisited that in Moon Hunters. Moon Hunters is a 1 to 4 player cooperative personality test RPG coming to Switch next week. And in addition to procedurally generating the levels where you fight monsters, it also would kind of slot in descriptions of your actions as remembered by the world in hundreds of years later. So you would end up with this kind of generated myth. So we kind of added this additional challenge of trying to procedurally generate an understanding of the story that you were building in the game. Now, Moon Hunters did pretty well for us, and unfortunately, most of the awards we received weren't in honor of the algorithm. They were, in fact, awards for other parts of the game that were human-authored. And in the next game, when we started building Shrouded Isle, which is a cult management simulator, where you have to sacrifice someone every season, we were generating the villagers. And in this case, each villager, every time you started the game, would have a secret virtue and a vice, and you'd have to figure out what it is, and it was pretty cool. But at the same time, I was editing this textbook, which is on sale now, and what I was noticing as I was reading through it is that each of the 20-something authors were approaching their algorithm in a very different way, and they were using it, the inputs and the outputs differently. And one thing that I saw was a constant, was that all of them ended up needing to give up some form of control and personalizing that differently. And multiple authors actually started referring to their algorithm as a collaborator. And I think that helps in several ways. So I'm not only the captain of Kitfox in that I stand on the prow of the Kitfox boat and I say, we're going this way. I also am responsible for production, making sure the game comes out on time in budget. I'm also the marketer, making sure that people understand what the game is and why they would like it. And the algorithm provides strengths and weaknesses in all of those areas. So, let's mentally shift away from thinking of the algorithm as something that we code and build and therefore can completely understand, and instead thinking of it as another person. Why are we hiring this team member? What are they bringing to our team? Now, the original goal is usually that people want a game that can't be finished. They want something that's unpredictable, and more importantly, that they want it to be replayable because this unpredictability is surprising, and we love surprises. I mean, I don't know about you, I love being surprised. And so even just building the game is more fun when the game can surprise you while you're working on it. And of course, in this modern day, streamers and YouTubers also add value when the game is still replayable after having watched a Let's Play, right? And maybe more ethereally, but I think equally importantly, it is also a point of fact that if you hire a procedural generation algorithm as a team member, you're more likely to end up with a situation where players feel like the experience that they had with your game is different from everyone else's experience, and they have a reason to talk about it with their friends that, oh, this time I found this, and I talked to this person, and this happened. Can you believe that? Oh, that's not what happened to me. It's kind of the dream, right? Is that your players are not only interacting, but co-creating their experience. And the breadth of possibilities can be positively invigorating, not just within one game, but across all games. Like in these 6 examples of wonderful, beautiful games, the procedural generation is only the level design, and yet it looks so different. Like you can do virtually anything with this team member. This team member has versatility up the wazoo. They can work in any genre. They can work with any tools because you built them. and you don't have to pay them. Oh, that's not true, actually. Hold on, we'll get to that. So how do you analyze whether this is the correct choice for your game? First, when you're hiring people, you want to make sure they can do the job. So, that's the first thing you do. Say, can you do this work? Yes. No? Yes. Okay, good. Can you tell me how you want to work? Will you influence how the game feels? Will you make it more flavorful than if you weren't part of the team? Can you correctly assess which parts of the game you can take and run with and which parts are mine that I can take and run with? Can you actually listen to me when I tell you what I want from the game? Penultimately, can the team feel more energized by having this team member? I mean, I would say this is the case for any hire. If you're hiring someone that makes the whole team sad or freak out every day, maybe that's not a good hire for you. And finally, if that team member is silent and just kind of does their work and doesn't tell you how they're feeling about their work or what they think is going well with the game and what they think is not going well with the game, then that's also a difficult hire to make. And procedural generation can do all of these things. The first 2 are especially good. If you want the hardest worker ever, they don't complain about crunch at all. C# will tell you when you're using the wrong function call. They know how they want you to talk to them, and they'll work while you're asleep. It's good. The other ones are a little harder and a little bit up to, it depends how you build them. And this is where it becomes a little bit difficult for me to tell you whether it's worth it for you in particular, but I can tell you how we come to these decisions at Kifox. Because there are some down points to procedural generation. The typical fear for people who start working procedural generation isn't that it's going to be maybe they start out thinking it'll be too random, but very quickly you learn that the real danger is making it too samey. And in fact, the more you work with it, the more you'll start feeling like, oh, I know exactly what's going to come out of this. This is not unknowable anymore. It is extremely knowable. And at that point, why did you hire that collaborator in the first place, right? And so this is an example of the kind of level that we would generate for Moon Hunters. It was fine. You could get from the left to the right, and you would fight monsters, and it got a little bit harder towards the end, and there were treasures off on the side paths, but it was okay. And I'm the creative director. It's kind of my job to make sure things are actually great, not just okay. And so I was trying to give my collaborator feedback. I was like, actually there's too many dead ends. People are having to backtrack a lot. The pacing is actually very kind of similar across levels, and plus it's just too open. What kind of level design doesn't involve interesting path decisions? But when I tried to constrain the corridors, it would cut them off completely, and then the level was uncompletable. So the collaborator was kind of pouting because it didn't know what I wanted it to do. I was like, make it better, I don't know. And unfortunately, this is around the same time that our translator, our tech programmer of this algorithm left. And he warned us. He was like, we hacked it together a little bit, it's gonna need a revamp. And so we tried expressing to the algorithm, please, can you understand how to make it better? And at the end of the day, John Wu, my co-founder and current tech lead, believes in retrospect, maybe procedural generation was the wrong choice for Moon Hunters. Partially due to the cost, partially due to the fact that we had built handmade chunks in the level, and that constrained the amount of uniqueness we could have gotten anyway, even if we did do multiple revamps. And it's difficult to say. And I started to think about, where did we go wrong? Because, Moon Hunters was only, a few hours long. We wanted you to be able to 100% it in 5 or 6 hours. And so, was it really worth it? And I feel like there is a world in which it was worth it. But we had walked too far down the wrong path of hiring the wrong collaborator. So looking again at all the things that these collaborators can do, we need to keep in mind that maybe an outdoor mythological world is harder because this collaborator prefers to be talked to in order and logic, and little units of things are easier for it to handle rather than trying to make something sprawling and organic looking. Maybe we didn't build in enough high-level variables. Basically, this collaborator took all of the ownership away after we had given it its idea of what the level is. There was no general way to tell this collaborator, okay, now we want a more open level, now we want a more constrained environment, now we want this kind of thing. There was none of that available. I did have pretty good script access, so I could go in there and tweak little things, so that was fine. And we did have pretty good tools where you could press play and then see a level instantly without needing to go through all the menus and everything. You could see 100 variants of the level, but you're just pressing the button a few times. And finally, we did get pretty good feedback. The level would kind of complain if there were too many monsters, or if an AI, it would do a little AI try and get to the end of the level, and if the AI couldn't do that, then it would complain and say, this isn't a good level. I can't finish the game. This is not good. But so the way that we actually work with our algorithms is imagining that this is a level designer that we're working with. First, as junior level designer, I'm going to say, okay, here's what a good level looks like. This is a good level. I build it by hand in the engine, piece by piece, and I look at it. And I still haven't written any code. Nobody's written any code. We just think about, okay, why is that level good for this game? How big are the rooms? How wide are the corridors? How many monsters are there? What is the pacing? What are all the things that I, as the senior level designer, am trying to teach this junior level designer about level design? And so then we start coding. Now that we have some idea of what a good level in this game looks like, we start teaching it, and it's a very fast learner, as long as you know the language. But then there's still going to be some problems. You have to play test, you have to bug fix, and all of this was fun. It really came to the point where I needed the junior designer to think how they would make their level better, and they weren't really good at that part. With our translator gone, it was very difficult to talk to. And it ended up feeling more stubborn than we intended, specifically because we didn't factor in enough time in the production schedule to really let the algorithm bring its own style and improve the game that way, rather than fight against it and feel stubbornly refused. And furthermore, it wouldn't take direction very well at all. So going forward, we're going to be prioritizing the ability for any algorithm we build to be able to take direction, because if something's so complicated that it needs, extensive creative inputs, then we need to consider whether that is a good hire to make for our team. So for the Shrouded Isle, I know that I generously said that we generate these villagers. No, it's really more like a board game. We just kind of randomly slot in some virtues and vices, and then it's kind of in your head. You generate what that means. If someone is violent and rebellious, well, that kind of goes well together. Childlike and cowardly. You get kind of this mental image of who that is, but the algorithm doesn't need to be involved in that. It's not doing a lot of work there. And in our next game, who here has not seen Boyfriend Dungeon? Maybe? Oh, some people. All right, I'm going to show you. Great.
Hunting, I'm on the lookout for something. I'm lonesome, but I feel alive. God's love is standing on my time. Don't
describing it in a way that my collaborator would understand would be very difficult, and I wouldn't even, wow, it's hard enough to, make a Tinder profile, so what we basically decided was that we're not generating anything about the boyfriends, even though in theory that's like part of the KitFox brand, is we're like procedural and whatever, it's like, no, it's not really worth it to try to make an AI predict what is likable and attractive to humans. It's much better at generating things like grid levels, and so we're going to play to our collaborators' strengths and constrain them to only the dungeon. And then we can hire lovely co-collaborators like Christine Love to come help us, because she understands how to make people likable. So you have a few options when you are hiring, and I think the number one thing you need to do, if you want to release your game and finish it, is to actually calculate how long it's going to take. And oftentimes what will happen is when you make a level, you kind of factor in this buffer time. Like you make your first version and you're like, okay, I put in 20%, and then maybe, if I factored in failure, as Matt said, I can double that. Well, that's not gonna be good enough for this collaborator, unfortunately. I'm gonna tell you that probably when you get your first working version, let's say that takes you 2 weeks, if you're very fast. Well, you really should help it understand how to talk to you, so you're going to need to add some analytics and some ways to interface and add content to it, which needs tools. You're probably going to need to spend some time looking at all the edge cases, and it's going to take 5 to 9 times. I think this is back to the napkin math for sure, but as a producer, it's very terrifying when that first work unit is unknowable. So the more mysterious that very first work unit is, the more you should think, can I afford to either release an unshippable version? Maybe you can do early access, that's awesome, but maybe you can't. And that's even before you started iterating, that's before you started figuring out what's bad about it and rebuilding the parts that you don't like. So your whole year might be gone by the time you realize that you hired the wrong person. So that's why we decided to think of our algorithm more as an intern in the Shrouded Isle. It's a very good intern, does its work, and it's fine, no bugs, it's great. We're rehiring a level design position to help make our dungeons cool, and we're going to pay more attention to that, those other problems I mentioned before. But theoretically, you could also use an environment artist. It sounded like Night in the Woods has some really cool environment art, procedural stuff going on there. There's a lot of cool narration you can do, and particle effects are kind of the classic computer thing to do. And maybe you can hire an algorithm as your storyteller. I don't know if you've seen Ladoliel. I could put Caves of Hed or Dwarf Fortress here, but I feel like not enough people know that you can go be a diplomat to an alien civilization that was generated just for you. So you should go play that game. And I feel like there is a unique advantage to really leaning into all the advantages an algorithm can give you if you hire them as your creative director, and really ask, what kind of game do you want to make? So I really hope more people do that, but do it with the open eyes of understanding that they might get something that humans don't like, and that's okay. Thank you.